Hi everyone, it's John. Welcome back to my channel. It is May 26th, 2021, and as I promised you last week, instead of another book review, I was going to do installment 2 of the rather large set of books that I bought from Princeton University Press back in January. In case you missed the last time I posted installment 1, which was should be exactly 3 weeks ago, so go check that out if you missed it. I bought about 40 or 45 books, and I just wanted to break them up into about chunks of 10, just so no one lost, in case you had any interest in the first place, no one lost any interest by, shoving an inordinate number of books that would bore you to tears down your throat. So these range everything of biography, a little bit of history, literary history, history of science, and actually one book, because I haven't shown it on this channel yet, that I actually bought from Hamilton Books several months ago. And I'll tell you which one. It happens to be the last one I'll show you. But let me get started. This first one was a little nice thing, slender, but it's called The Holy Roman Empire, A Short History, by Barbara Stolberg-Rillinger. And Stolberg-Rillinger is a scholar, a historian of the early modern part of the Holy Roman Empire. Let me just read you, like I did with installment 1, the sort of ad matter that Princeton has on its site about each book. The Holy Roman Empire emerged in the Middle Ages as a loosely integrated union of German states and city-states under the supreme rule of an emperor, and would endure until its dissolution in 1806 during the Napoleonic Wars. Barbara Stolberg-Rillinger provides a concise history of the empire, presenting an interpretation of its unique political culture and remarkably durable institutions. In a narrative spanning 3 turbulent centuries, Stolberg-Rillinger shows how it was a political body unlike any other, bound together by personal loyalty and reciprocity, tradition and shared purpose, and constantly reenacted by solemn rituals. This is actually a translation from the German by someone who I think is also who teaches at Yale, by the name of Herr Minsker, into English. So actually already dipped into this one a bit, and I will be talking about it soon. As always, anything I finish cover to cover, you will be hearing about eventually. The next one is this: The Infidel and the Professor, David Hume, Adam Smith, and the Friendship That Shaped Modern Thought, by Dennis C. Rasmussen. David Hume is arguably the most important philosopher ever to have written in English, but during his lifetime he was attacked as, quote, the great infidel for his religious skepticism and deemed unfit to teach the young. In contrast, Adam Smith, now hailed as the founding father of capitalism, was a revered professor of moral philosophy. Remarkably, Hume and Smith were best friends, sharing what Dennis Rasmussen calls the greatest of all philosophical friendships. The Infidel and the Professor tells the story of their close relationship between these two towering Enlightenment thinkers and how it influenced their world-changing ideas. It shows that Hume contributed more to economics, and Smith contributed more to philosophy than is generally recognized. The result is a compelling account of a great friendship that had great consequences for modern thought. And as far as Adam Smith contributing to philosophy. That is just an unavoidably true statement. Read The Theory of Moral Sentiments. Not exactly the most popular book by Adam Smith, but it is a fascinating and insightful book, and every bit as thought-provoking as anything that David Hume wrote about morality, which he did spill quite a bit of ink on the subject. Right, here's another dip into my history of philosophy without any gaps podcast interest. This is Ibn Khaldun, an intellectual biography by Robert Irwin. Ibn Khaldun, whose dates were 1332 to 1406, is generally regarded as the greatest intellectual to have ever appeared in the Arab world. A genius who ranks as one of the world's great minds. Yet the author of the Muqaddimah, the most important study of history ever produced in the Islamic world, and by the way, that's very much short-selling it. It's not only history, it's economics, sociology, social science, demography. It's a lot of things. Very sort of groundbreaking type of book when it was published towards the end of the 14th century. Well, written towards the end of the 14th century. The Muqaddimah is not as well known as it should be, and his ideas are widely misunderstood. In this book, Robert Irwin provides an engaging and authoritative account of Ibn Khaldun's extraordinary life, times, writings, and ideas. So, an intellectual biography. Not only does it sound like one, it explicitly says it is one. So, wonderful. All right. Next is the ad matter for this one is quite verbose, so I'll nevertheless read it all for you. This is The Work of the Dead, A Cultural History of Mortal Remains by Thomas W. LaCour, with a little blurb up there by Stephen Greenblatt, the famous Harvard scholar who calls this a moving triumph of scholarship and the historical imagination. Thomas LaCour is a cultural historian. He's written another book on, I think it was called The Solitary Sex, which is a cultural history of masturbation. I don't think that one was on sale at Princeton, or I would have bought it. This is not only a beautiful hardcover, but also has sort of lovely inset full color prints in it too. The Greek philosopher Diogenes said that when he died, his body should be tossed over the city walls for beasts to scavenge. Why should he or anyone else care what became of his corpse? In The Work of the Dead, acclaimed cultural historian Thomas LaCour examines why humanity has universally rejected Diogenes' argument. No culture has been indifferent to mortal remains. Even in our supposedly disenchanted scientific age, the dead body still matters for individuals, communities, and nations. A remarkably ambitious history, The Work of the Dead, offers a compelling and richly detailed account of how and why the living have cared for the dead from antiquity to the 20th century. The book draws on a vast range of sources, from mortuary archaeology, medical tracts, songs, letters, poems, and novels, to paintings and landscapes, in order to recover the work that the dead do for the living, making human communities that connect the past and the future. LaCour shows how the churchyard became the dominant resting place of the dead during the Middle Ages, and why the cemetery largely supplanted it during the modern period. He traces how and why, since the 19th century, we have come to gather the names of the dead on great lists and memorials, and why being buried without a name has become so disturbing. And finally, he tells how modern cremation, begun as a fantasy of stripping death of its history, ultimately failed, and how even the ashes of the victims of the Holocaust have been preserved in culture. So that sounds like a fascinating argument. Cultural history, cultural/intellectual history. Yes, so another one with a somewhat overly verbose bit of ad matter. These long ones seem to get more words, not only in the books but actually attention. I can't get over how many notes. This thing has 250 pages worth of notes. Let's see, for a grand total of near 900 pages. This is Sophocles, a study of his theater in its political and social context, by Jacques Jonas. Wonderful little hardback. Not little, weighs 27 pounds, but a wonderful hardback nonetheless. Here, for the first time in English, is celebrated French classicist Jacques Jonas' magisterial account of the life and work of Socrates. Exhaustive and authoritative, this acclaimed book combines biography and detailed studies of Sophocles' plays, all set in rich historical context of classical Greek tragedy and the political, social, religious, and cultural world of Athens' greatest age, the 5th century BC. Sophocles was the commanding figure of his day. The author of Oedipus Rex and Antigone, he was not only the leading dramatist, but also a distinguished politician, military commander, and religious figure. And yet the evidence about his life has, until now, been fragmentary. Reconstructing a lost literary world, Joanna has finally assembled all the available information, culled from inscriptions, archaeological evidence, and later sources. He also offers a huge range of new interpretations from his emphasis on the significance of Sophocles' political and military offices, previously seen often as honorary, to his analysis of Sophocles' plays in the mythic and literary context of 5th century drama. Written for scholars, students, and general readers, this book will interest anyone who wants to know more about Greek drama in general, and Sophocles in particular, with an extensive bibliography, that's certainly an understatement, with an extensive bibliography and useful summaries, not only of Sophocles' extant plays, but also uniquely of the fragments of plays that have been partially lost. It will be a standard reference in classical studies for years to come. Only just now reading that it actually has précis of the plays. That might be, I was thinking I might have to go back and reread all of Socrates before digging into the book, but I might do that anyway. How boring could that be? Alright, so here is another large book that I was really excited to see. I didn't know that Princeton had published this. I'd seen it, but I didn't know Princeton published it. So, of course, they had, so it was on sale. And this is Empire and Revolution, The Political Life of Edmund Burke by Richard Bourke. I remember this coming out a couple of years ago. Always been fascinated by Burke as sort of a founder of political conservatism, as sort of its birthplace being in the discontent of the French Revolution, his disappointment in it, his dis-ease with it. So really, really wonderful to have a obviously fully fleshed out biography of the guy. Edmund Burke lived from 1730 to 1797 during one of the most extraordinary periods of world history. He grappled with the significance of the British Empire in India. He fought for reconciliation with the American colonies. And he was a vocal critic of national policy during 3 European wars. He also advocated for reform in Britain and became a central protagonist in the great debate on the French Revolution. Drawing on the complete range of printed and manuscript sources, Empire and Revolution offers a vivid reconstruction of the major concerns of this outstanding statesman, orator, and philosopher. In restoring Burke to his original political and intellectual context, this book overturns the conventional picture of a partisan of tradition against progress and presents a multifaceted portrait of one of the most captivating figures of the 18th century. Boldly ambitious work of scholarship, this book challenges us to rethink the legacy of Burke and the turbulent era in which he played so pivotal a role. So, yeah, I've always wanted a bit of a nudge on the shoulder to go read Reflections on the French Revolution and further reflections. Liberty Fund, who probably most people know if you're watching this channel, has a 4 volume set of most of Burke's political writings, especially about the French Revolution. So, of which I have a few, not the entire one, but this will give me some motivation to eventually do that when I get around to it. So here's a little bit of history of science. Always wanted this book, also didn't know that Princeton published it. It was a little expensive, but that's okay, I don't care. I wanted it, and sort of just always seen it, always been fascinated by the topic, and maybe I won't bore you to death when I talk about it for 2 minutes. This is Theology and the Scientific Imagination. Okay, the tiny print is too small for me. From the Middle Ages to the 17th Century, the second edition, with a new foreword by Jonathan Sheehan, by Amos Funkenstein. Amos Funkenstein was the Corrett Professor of Jewish History and the University Professor at UC Berkeley, and the Mazer Chair in History and Philosophy of Science at Tel Aviv University. And this is really one of those books that you see in upper-level university courses on philosophy of science and a lot of graduate courses. So I wanted this. Theology and the Scientific Imagination is a pioneering work of intellectual history that transformed our understanding of the relationship between Christian theology and the development of science. Distinguished scholar Amos Funkenstein explores the metaphysical foundations of modern science and shows how, by the 1600s, theological and scientific thinking had become almost one. Major figures like Descartes, Leibniz, Newton, and others developed an unprecedented secular theology whose debt to medieval and scholastic thought shaped the trajectory of the scientific revolution. The book ends with Funkenstein's influential analysis of the 17th century's unprecedented fusion of scientific and religious language. Featuring a new foreword, Theology and the Scientific Imagination is a path-breaking and classic work that remains a fundamental resource for historians and philosophers of science. So, another book that sort of dovetails many of my interests: science, history, philosophy, theology. Yeah. Something else I was just... So after I got everything I knew I wanted. Then I just started browsing, and that's when I really, really got in trouble. Started finding things like the Funkenstein and this. Um, Tom, LA Books, if you're watching, I may have mentioned this to you. I know, I don't know if I was the first person to mention mimesis to you, or the Auerbach book on Dante, but here are selected essays of Erich Auerbach, Time, History, and Literature, just to give you some idea of the breadth of the essays in here. Vico's contribution to literary criticism. Topological symbolism in medieval literature. Dante and Virgil. The discovery of Dante by Romanticism. Marcel Proust and the novel of Lost Time. The three traits of Dante's poetry. Montaigne the writer. On Pascal's political theory. Just a lot of the philology of world literature. Just a lot of sort of essays that might have been published in sort of literary magazines in the 30s and 40s, collected by Princeton, published. Erich Auerbach dates from 1892 to 1957. He's best known for his classic literary study called Mimesis. He is today celebrated as one of the founders of what we could really call comparative literature, a forerunner of secular criticism, and a prophet of global literary studies. Time, History, and Literature presents a wide selection of Auerbach's essays, many of which are little known outside the German-speaking world. Of the 20 essays culled for this volume from the full length of his career, 12 have never appeared in English before, and one is being published for the very first time. Grounded in this major new collection are Auerbach's complex relationship to the Judeo-Christian tradition, his philosophy of time and history, and his theory of human ethics and responsible action. Auerbach effectively charts out the difficult territory in the wake of Christianity of the sensuous, the earthly, and the human and social worlds. A number of the essays reflect Auerbach's responses to an increasingly hostile National Socialist movement. These writings offer a challenging model of intellectual engagement, one that remains as compelling today as it was in Auerbach's own time. Okay, 3 more Princeton books to go, and then the 1 Hamilton book that I told you about. This is a bit more history of science. Oh, another one of those books I had no idea Princeton published, so was elated to find and finally have a copy of. This is the 3rd edition of Revolutionizing the Sciences, European Knowledge in Transition, 1500 to 1700, by Peter Deer. A slim thing, without notes, not even 175 pages, but important. Like the Funkenstein, see it everywhere. Every major bibliography, syllabus, it's there. This thoroughly revised 3rd edition of an award-winning book offers keen insight into how the scientific revolution happened and why. Covering central figures including Copernicus, Kepler, Galileo, Newton, and Bacon, this edition features greater treatment of alchemy and associated craft activities to reflect trends in current scholarship, extended material on Francis Bacon, and a new historiographical essay. Reflecting on the origins of scientific practice in early modern Europe, Peter Deer traces the revolution in thought that changed the natural world from something to be contemplated into something to be used. Concise and readable, This book is ideal for students who are studying the scientific revolution and its impact on the early modern world. The first edition was the winner of the Watson Davis and Helen Miles Davis Prize of the History of Science Society. Excuse me. So this next writer is Richard Wollen. Richard Wollen sort of has, from what I understand, some sort of long-standing sort of dislike of many of the big figures of 20th century thought, like Foucault, Marcuse. I really need to dig into this. I'm not sure he's a big fan of like Nietzsche either. I know Nietzsche was 19th century, but he's written a few books like this, and this is called. They had a few by him. I just bought one. Heidegger's Children. Hannah Arendt, Karl Lowith, Hans Jonas, and Herbert Marcuse by what does it say on the bottom there? Yeah, it's just his name, Richard Wollen. I can obviously understand why he wasn't a huge Heidegger fan, but maybe I'll learn why when I read the book. Martin Heidegger is perhaps the 20th century's greatest philosopher. I don't know about that. And his work stimulated much that is original and compelling in modern thought. A seductive classroom presence, he attracted Germany's brightest young intellects during the 1920s. Many were Jews, who ultimately would have to reconcile their philosophical and often personal commitments to Heidegger with his nefarious political views. In 1933, Heidegger cast his lot with National Socialism. He squelched the careers of Jewish students and denounced fellow professors whom he considered insufficiently radical. For years, he signed letters and opened lectures with Heil Hitler. He paid dues to the Nazi Party until the bitter end. Equally problematic for his former students were his sordid efforts to make existential thought serviceable to Nazi ends and his failure to ever renounce these actions. This book explores how 4 of Heidegger's most influential Jewish students came to grips with his Nazi association and how it affected their thinking. Hannah Arendt, who was Heidegger's lover as well as his student, went on to become one of the century's greatest political thinkers. Karl Lowith returned to Germany in 1953 and quickly became one of its leading philosophers. Hans Jonas grew famous as Germany's premier philosopher of environmentalism, and Herbert Marcuse gained celebrity as a Frankfurt School intellectual and mentor to the New Left. Why did these brilliant minds fail to see what was in Heidegger's heart and Germany's future? How would they, after the war, reappraise Germany's intellectual traditions? Could they salvage aspects of Heidegger's thought? Would their philosophy reflect or completely reject their early studies? Could these Heideggerians forgive or even try to understand the betrayal of the man they so admired? Heidegger's Children locates these paradoxes in the wider, cruel irony that European Jews experienced their greatest calamity immediately following their fullest assimilation, and it finds in their responses answers to questions about the nature of existential disillusionment and the juncture between politics and ideas. Last Princeton book for this installment, number 2. I've never heard of this guy before, so obviously was not necessarily anticipating buying it, but he was his name is Charles Colston Gillespie, was the Dayton Stockton Professor Emeritus of the History of Science at Princeton. and he wrote this book called The Edge of Objectivity, an essay in the history of scientific ideas. This was originally published in 1960. The Edge of Objectivity helped to establish the history of science, sort of a fully fledged, fleshed out academic discipline. In the mid-50s, a young professor at Princeton named Charles Gillespie began teaching Humanities 304, one of the first undergraduate courses offered anywhere in the world, and the history of science. From Galileo's analysis of motion to theories of evolution and relativity, Gillespie introduces key concepts, individuals, and themes. The Edge of Objectivity arose out of this course. It must have been a lively class. The Edge of Objectivity is pointed, opinionated, and selective. Even at 600 pages, the book is, as the title suggests, an essay. Gillespie is unafraid to rate Mendel higher than Darwin, Maxwell above Faraday. Full of wry turns of phrase, the book effectively captures people and places, and throughout the book, Gillespie pushes an argument. He views science as the progressive development of more objective, detached, mathematical ways of viewing the world, and he orchestrates his characters and ideas around this theme. This edition of Gillespie's landmark book introduces a new generation of readers to his provocative and enlightening account of the advancement of scientific thought over the course of the last 4 centuries. Since its original publication, historians of science have focused increasingly on the social context of science rather than its internal dynamics, and they have frequently viewed science more as a threatening instance of power than as an accumulation of knowledge. Nevertheless, Gillespie's book remains a sophisticated, fast-moving, idiosyncratic account of the development of scientific ideas over 400 years by one of the founding intellects in the history of science. And I do not have a blurb or a small essay to read you in a few of those instances about this last book, but it's one I found, 6 months ago or so. It seemed like everyone and their mother on BookTube was reading Wolf Hall, and the 2 accompanying books in the trilogy, and a few people had signed on to read this. This is not why I bought it. I was already nose deep in half a dozen other things, but I knew that I would want to read it eventually. It's a book that everyone has seen. This is Thomas Cromwell, A Revolutionary Life by Dharme and Makala. The nice sort of hardback by Viking Press. So, those are the books of installment number 2 from Princeton University Press. Let me know if you have any comments below. Are curious to have me read anything. If you have opinions, have read any of them yourself, let me know, and I will see you next week with another True Blue book review. No more Princeton books for a few weeks. Bye, everyone.